Religious leaders and activists from Church World Service hold up a door closed to refugees during a protest urging Congress to pressure U.S. President Donald Trump to allow more refugees to enter in front of the Capitol in September. Andrew Caballero Reynolds FBGT images. A few days after Donald Trump was elected president, more than 100 people packed into a church sanctuary in Poughkeepsie, NY to hear a presentation about refugee resettlement in their town. It didn't go well. This was after Trump had campaigned on refusing Syrian refugees, citing security concerns. In the church that night, staffers from the non-profit organization Church World Service laid out their plan to open a refugee resettlement office in Poughkeepsie, and bring in about 80 refugees, mostly from the Congo, Iraq and Syria. The aunts had questions. A lot of them. They wanted to know, would they be safe and could Poughkeepsie afford to care for these new residents? What I didn't anticipate was how the issue would be politicized by the election climate. It went from being a kind of run-of-the-mill, like, maybe not here, to these Muslims are going to take over our neighborhood and ruin Poughkeepsie. Patrick D. Young is a resident of this town, of this city. I can look out my window anytime and find someone in need, said Poughkeepsie resident Stephen Plank, to vigorous applause. The head of Church World Service's refugee program, Errol Kekek, spent more than an hour trying to respond to the questions. We had to do a lot of truth-telling, and dispel some myths, says Kekek. From the value of my property will go down because refugees will be resettling next to me, to are we bringing terrorists to why are we bringing people who don't all look like us? Errol Kekek is the executive director of the Immigration and Refugee Program at the global humanitarian agency Church World Service. Joel Rosen PR. It's getting harder for refugees to find a welcoming home in the U.S. The Trump administration has cut the number of refugees allowed into the country. In cities and towns across the nation, citizens are protesting refugees being resettled in their neighborhoods. In Poughkeepsie, the debate got ugly. On social media, people called opponents of the refugee plan racists and Islamophobes. The staff of Church World Service received death threats. What I didn't anticipate was how the issue would be politicized by the election climate, says Vassar College student Patrick D. Young, who helped launch the effort to bring refugees to Poughkeepsie. He says the intensity of the debate surprised him. It went from being a kind of run-of-the-mill, like, maybe not here, to, these Muslims are going to take over our neighborhood and ruin Poughkeepsie, D. Young says. Until recently, refugee resettlement in the U.S. had wide bipartisan support. The U.S. State Department, along with 9 large nonprofit groups, decides where to resettle refugees fleeing persecution, war and violence. They look for communities where there are volunteers to help. Patrick D. Young is one of those volunteers. He's now a college senior, but before he came to Vassar, Sergeant D. Young served 5 years in the Army. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan, where he saw firsthand civilians being forced from their homes. I felt that there was an obligation to, welcome the stranger and to help people, a chance for the country to show its best self, D. Young says. So, why not here, why not in Poughkeepsie? Others in town felt that was the wrong question to ask. We all wondered, why Poughkeepsie, says David Cole, 37, a lifelong resident of the town who helped mobilize opposition to Church World Service. Cole insists he has nothing against Muslims or other refugees. But he says Poughkeepsie isn't a wealthy town. Unemployment there is higher than the statewide average. I looked at people that I knew, Cole says. And I said, okay, well, why aren't these people getting help? Why are we trying to help, people from war-torn countries in an area where there's people looking for jobs like they're scavenging for jobs around here? I don't get it. Lifelong Poughkeepsie resident David Cole, 37, helped mobilize opposition to the refugee resettlement plan. Joel Rosen PR. Church World Service did open an office in Poughkeepsie, but it only resettled 1 family of 5. The same story is playing out across America. Critics of the refugee program say they're mobilizing in at least a dozen places where people want more control over who's coming to live in their communities. State and local officials are supposed to be consulted before refugees come to their areas, says Susan Tully, National Field Director at the Federation for American Immigration Reform, which advocates for lower levels of immigration. But in practice, Tully says, that's not happening enough. The volunteer organizations who resettle these people seem to be almost the single driving force, and deciding voice, of where they go, Tully says. People are saying, oh, wait a minute, you're not the only one that's got a dog in this fight. Now, the state of Tennessee is suing the federal government to block refugee resettlement there. The mayor of Rutland, Vermont was voted out of office earlier this year after trying to bring in refugees to give the town's small workforce a boost. And in St. Cloud, Minnesota, some residents are calling for a moratorium on resettlement as the refugee community grows into the thousands. In response, the city council passed a resolution in support of a just and welcoming city. Still, Errol Kekek at Church World Service says most people support refugees, even in those places. Yes, there are loud voices in every community, Kekek says. But they're usually not the majority, and they're usually just a very loud minority. Kekek himself was a refugee from Bosnia more than 20 years ago. He says refugees do use public benefits, such as welfare and health care. But over time, refugees also start business and become productive members of society. At the end of the day, all of these differences, they may look different, speak a different language, kind of blend in. And you just get a new neighbor, Kekek says. But that's not what happened in Poughkeepsie. More than a year after that contentious meeting in the church sanctuary, the town's residents are still bitterly divided. Church World Service has closed its local office. The resettlement agency says there aren't enough new refugees arriving in the U.S. to justify an office there since President Trump slashed the number that are allowed in. And that one refugee family that came to Poughkeepsie, they're gone too. They moved away to find a community with other Congolese immigrants. A more welcoming community.